कितने खुश होते हैं जब जॉय मेहता हर रोज अपनी कम्युनिटी की मॉर्निंग एक्टिव कर देते हैं। आनंद राठी पड़ोस वाली आंटी को प्यारा सा सरप्राइज देते हैं। हैप्पी चड्डा हर पार्टी में दोस्तों के साथ बच्चे बन जाते हैं। जो हर मोमेंट को मेमोरी बनाते हैं वो ही छोटी खुशियों से बड़ी सी लाइफ बनाते हैं। छोटी खुशियां बढ़ती रहे with बैंक ऑफ बड़ौदा क्रेडिट कार्ड।
At Hitachi, we're changing how we power the world. Transporting clean energy from Germany to Norway. We're developing electrification technologies across America and using AI to stop illegal logging before it happens in Indonesia. Building a brighter future through global collaboration for a green, innovative, and digitally driven planet. Powered by Hitachi.
Hello, everyone. Hope you all are having a great morning. I'm Debangana Ghosh, and I'm going to be your host for this event. Firstly, a very warm welcome to the Countdown to Budget 2022, brought to you by the Hindu Business Line in association with BOB Financial, the credit card arm of Bank of Baroda, and Hitachi India. This year's theme for the pre-budget event is Accelerating India's Economic Growth. Union budget comes at a time when the Indian economy is emerging from the pandemic. The expectations are that the budget will do everything to accelerate economic growth, but there are constraints that the government faces as well. So today's event will deliberate on what the government should do and what it can under these circumstances. As we proceed with the event, don't forget to use and follow #BLBudget on your social media platforms to get live updates. Now, without further ado, let's dive in. I request Raghuvi Srinivasan, editor, The Hindu Business Line, to deliver the welcome address and introduce our chief guest.
Hello, good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to Shri Nitin Gadkari ji, Minister for Road Transport and Highways. Very glad you could make it to the event today, sir, and we are all awaiting thoughts on the budget and on the economy. A warm welcome to all those who have tuned in to this session, which is a very fixed calendar event for us every year ahead of the budget. The countdown to the budget has been an event that has been going on for several years now. It's usually in a physical format, but this year, due to the prevailing circumstances, we have moved to an online session. It's again the time of the year when we await what the finance minister holds in the budget package. No budget is easy, every budget is challenging, but this year is particularly so because of the third wave that the country is going through right now. Things were going on smoothly until even a month ago when it was hunky-dory all around and there was optimism. But now there seems to be some amount of pushback because of the pandemic and its impact on some sectors. So what will Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman do on February 1st is the question that's on everyone's minds. And she has quite a few challenges. She has to push expenditure because there has been an impact of the second wave of COVID. We were still recovering from it when the third wave struck us. And she's constrained for finances as well. Though revenues have been very buoyant this year, there are other pressures and constraints on her finances. And she has to mind the fiscal deficit too, which is already quite high at 6.8%. She has to bring it down at least by 3 or 4 percentage points, if not more. That's the expectation. So it is in this backdrop that we have the budget going on this year. And this session, of course, we can't second guess what the finance minister is going to do, but this session is going to set the backdrop for the budget. And we have several eminent panelists with us. There are going to be 2 panels in the next couple of hours. There's one on balancing fiscal prudence and accelerating growth, where we have people like Dr. Ajit Ranade, Ms. Sonal Verma, and others. And we also have a second session called Reviving Private Investment, What More Can the Government Do?, where we have the CEO of Mercedes-Benz in India, Martin Schwenk, and we have Preet Dhupar, Chief Financial Officer of IKEA India. So it's going to be quite a interesting next 2 hours for you all. So welcome again, stay tuned, and I now request Honorable Minister Nitin Gadkari ji to deliver his special address. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaskar. It is really a great pleasure for me to interact with you. The Indian economy is the fastest growing economy in the world. But because of COVID-19, we are facing serious problem. Now the third wave is going on. So 100% this is also a big challenge for the country. I always telling to the people that there are some people who convert problems into opportunities. And there are some people who convert opportunities into the problems. My feeling is we need to accept this challenge and win over the COVID-19 with first wave, second wave, third wave. Probably we may expect the fourth wave also. But I am confident that with the cooperation of the people of India under the able leadership of Prime Minister Modi ji, we will win this war. Regarding the financial position of the country, no doubt, the India is the fastest growing economy. The first of all, our GDP growth, it is exactly approximately 12%, it coming from agriculture and agriculture allied industries. 22 to 24% from the manufacturing sector, and 52 to 56% from the service sector. Actually, in the growth, the contribution of MSME is more than 35% now. So MSME, agriculture, these are the important driving forces for the economy by which we can make Indian economy strong. First of all, my observation, which is really a success story for our government, that is our agriculture growth is increased. First of all, we have surplus sugar, surplus rice, surplus wheat, surplus corn. And now it is a problem that the surplus of food grain is a big problem for the country. Our government has taken a revolutionary decision that we are importing petroleum and gas of 8 lakh crores. We are also importing the 25 to 30% coal. In the energy sector, our dependence upon the, particularly from abroad, that is one of the challenges to us. So the most important thing is in our government, we have taken a decision that how we can stop the import of this, particularly in energy sector, and how it can be useful to create more employment potential and contributing growth for the country. Today, we are working on the line on ethanol. First of all, we allow making ethanol from sugarcane molasses. Then we allow it making it from sugarcane juice, then BAB molasses. And now we are giving permission to make ethanol from food grains, particularly from rice, corn, where it can be a good thing for the farmer. I am expecting that at least 500 industries new are going to establish in the rural and agriculture India, which is going to create more employment potential. Presently, the ethanol production is 400 crore liters, but in this year, I am confident it will go up to 550 crore liters, and our basic requirement is 4,000 crore liter. As a transport minister, we have taken a decision that now we will use flex engine in two-wheeler, three-wheeler, and four-wheeler. In place of petrol, the flex engine, it means that you can use 100% petrol or 100% bioethanol. So I'm confident in due course of time, we will reduce the demand of petrol, and our all manufacturing giants like Hyundai, Suzuki, and Toyota, they are now in position to launch their flex engine vehicle in the market, and where there's 65 to 70% share from them. So it is going to create new ethanol pump in the country. The two-wheeler company Bajaj and TVS already, they are ready with their models, two-wheeler models on flex engine. So this is going to helpful to agriculture. Actually, at the same time, we are also working on green hydrogen. And we can make green hydrogen from biomass, and we can make green hydrogen from the sewage water. That is the idea in our mind. In the municipal corporation area, we can use sewage water. We have a solar panel, rooftop solar and wind, and by which the power cost will be very, very negligible, and water cost will be exactly free of cost. And we can convert with electrolyzer, we can convert green hydrogen, and we get it green hydrogen from that, which is the our target is that we need to make our country of who can export green hydrogen to the world. We can use this green hydrogen in industry like steel, cement, and chemical industry. It can be a great thing for a great contributor for in energy sector where we can reduce the import. At the same time, one of the important thing is LNG and at the same time electric vehicles. Because of the policy of our government, now there is a fast growth in electric vehicle, two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler, and even in buses. And now it is some of the company are in position to launch their trucks on electricity. We have surplus electricity. And that is the one of the reason that it is going to reduce the pollution, because pollution is also a big problem. So presently our automobile industry's turnover is 7.5 lakh crores. And we are making a lot of export. 3.5 lakh crores is our export. I am very much confident as a transport minister that within 5 years, our size of this industry will go up to 15 lakh crore. And this is the industry which is giving maximum employment potential in the country. This is the industry which is giving maximum revenue to the state government and central government. So this can be a great force, driving force behind the growth of our country, and the automobile industry is one of the future. And I'm expecting we will make Indian automobile industry as a #1 world manufacturing hub in the world. So that is exactly our dream, and we are on the same line. All reputed brands in the world are now present in Indian scenario, and I am confident that 100% we will achieve this goal. Regarding the most important thing is agriculture. And our 65 to 75% population belongs to agriculture. And our growth, our contribution in GDP growth is only 12%. Now we are already decided to create more irrigation facilities. We are very much cautious about water conservation and creating more water irrigation projects. The central government is now, actually this is a state subject, but with Pradhan Mantri Sinchai Yojana, and now just clearing of the lot of dispute projects. When I was water resources minister, there was 17 to 18 dispute between the states. And at that time, we have cleared 13 disputes already clear. There are some disputes are there, particularly in the South India, in Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Gujarat. We are facing crucial problem for water. So water is the most important issue in this India, particularly part of our country. And now we are already completing the Polavaram project in Andhra Pradesh. And now the Godavari water is going to the sea. 1200 TMC of water is going to the sea. At the time when I was water resources minister, we are planned to take that water from backwater of Godavari to Krishna to Pennar, and Pennar to Kaveri, and that going up to the tail end of Tamil Nadu. So definitely we are working on this. We have cleared Ken Betwa project, which is going to help to Bundelkhand. We have already cleared 9 projects related with the Punjab, Haryana, Himachal, Uttarakhand, and Rajasthan and Delhi. So already we have taken 3 projects where at the time of the partition, our 3 rivers water was going to Pakistan and 3 rivers decided to water for India. But our water was going to Pakistan. So we are also considering that water and taking it to Punjab and Rajasthan, where it can create more irrigation facility. So agriculture growth rate is the most important thing. The Prime Minister approach is giving more encouragement for agriculture. We are now using a lot of new technology, drone technology in spraying, making nano urea, and now we are making nano mix fertilizer, by which we can achieve the productivity and we can reduce the cost. Our target is to reduce the cost, expenditure cost, and increase the profitability of the farmers. If the purchasing power of the farmers is increased, 100% it is going to boost Indian industry. The most important thing of our government is from last 4 or 5 years, every time our finance minister is giving a lot of priority for development of infrastructure in the country. As far as road sector is concerned, I am very much confident and very much I have a great pride for that we have 3 records. Now the time when I taken charge as a minister, it was coming to 2 kilometers per day. Now we are 38 kilometer per day, highest in the world of national highway construction. And that is exactly moving very fast. Then the second world record, Guinness Book of World Record, is we have just constructed 2.5 kilometer 4-lane cement concrete road on Mumbai-Delhi Express Highway near Vadodara within 22 hours. Then we have constructed, the third world record is constructing of Bijapur, Solapur, 1-lane bitumen road 26 kilometer in 22 hours. So these are the 3 record with us. We are working very fast. We are making lot of tunnels. We are making Jhojila tunnel near under Kargil, and still the work is going on. 1,000 workers are under the tunnel and they are working fast. The first time we have saved 5,000 crore on this tunnel. I know that the South India, the most important tunnel is that near Bangalore, Kashadi Ghat. No, it's so. No, I'm not. Shiradi Ghat. Shiradi Ghat tunnel also, yesterday I have a meeting and we are going to start that, which is going to increase more utility of Bangalore port. So 100% the road infrastructure, green express highway, we are making 22 green express highway. The result of our contribution in infrastructure, that Delhi to Meerut, it was taking 4 hours. Now it takes 45 minutes. Delhi to Dehradun, it was 9 hours. It was take 2.5 hours. And by our new express highway, it will be 2 hours. Delhi to Jaipur, within a month, it will be 2 hours. Delhi to Amritsar, it takes 8 hours. After this, it will be only 4 hours within a year. Delhi to Srinagar, 8 hours, and Delhi to Katra in 6 hours, and Delhi to Mumbai in 12 hours, and Chennai to Bangalore in 2.5 hours. So this type of new revolution in the road infrastructure is going to be a get result for us. It is going to reduce the logistic cost. Now, presently, one truck going from Delhi to Mumbai, it takes 48 to 50 hours. But after this, it will be 18 to 20 hours. So they will make more trips. It means that we can reduce the logistic cost. And in place of diesel, we are now using electric as a fuel. We are using LNG as a fuel. And there is a huge saving. And that's the reason that our present logistic cost is more than 16%. We can take it, reduce it up to 11 to 12%, and will be more competitive in international market, which is going to result for good export. We are connecting our all ports. We are developing waterways. We have already constructed 100 airports, and we are also in position. As far as the power is concerned, we are monetizing the project. Road project, we are monetizing. The power transmission project, we are monetizing. And our dream of our Prime Minister is to make Indian economy of $5 trillion. And now 111 lakh crore infrastructure is in planning. The Gati Shakti Yojana is one of the important things. We are working very fast on that. It is going to create more coordination, communication, and cooperation between the stakeholders. So 100%, we are now already in position to increase the rail network. So this is a position by which 100% we will be more competitive in international market. I am also confident that first of all, our concentration is how we can reduce our import and how we can increase our export. Regarding semiconductor, we have shortage. And that is crucial and very important for the industry. We have a special policy for that. We are making special policy for green hydrogen. We are also encouraging automobile industry. And 100% in textile also our export is increased. I am confident that due course of time our agriculture export, our industrial export is going to increase, and which is going to create more jobs in the country. Regarding MSME, we are contributing 30% of the growth. Now it comes to 35 to 40%. And our export of the country of 50% is from MSME. 100%, I know that because of COVID, we are facing some crucial problems. There are some problems, but with a strong political will, commitment, fast track decision-making process, corruption-free system, and time-bound program, 100% we are going to win this war. So there are a lot of challenges with the finance minister. Already we are giving priority for development of agriculture, agro-processing industries, food industries, fruit industries, vegetable industries. We are trying to increase more export in agriculture area. We are working on biofuel and alternative fuel to save our, actually the imports are very high. And whatever the semiconductors or in the petroleum or in the coal, everywhere, which are the imports, which are damaging the prospects of our economy, our all priorities, how we can develop all this thing in the country. Swadeshi, Swavalamban, That is most important mantra for all of us. And I'm confident that our economy is the fastest growing economy. The last, my point is, in the world scenario, the whole world is now interested. They're not very much interested to deal with China. And now the Chinese economy is also facing basically big problems. So this is the opportunity for Indian economy, Indian industry, Indian entrepreneurs, that we can take the advantage of it and we can make more export. We have got the talented young talented power, highest in the world available in India. We have availability of raw material, availability of power, availability of good infrastructure, development of ports with 18-meter rafts. So on this line, 100%, there are a lot of opportunity for increasing our export. By increasing our export, we can make Indian economy strong, and making Indian economy as Atmanirbhar Bharat. I am very much confident that our economy is the fastest growing economy, and our budget is to be giving 100%. I'm expecting the finance minister, but every year she is supporting for development of infrastructure in the country and giving the highest priority for that. At the same time, she is giving a lot of priority for agriculture, and her approach is that how we can reduce the import and make sustainable development in the country. The 115 aspirant districts, the agriculture, rural, tribal area, where we need to plan exactly a good vision by which we can create more employment potential, increase per capita income and GDP growth in that area. I am confident that this budget is going to helpful and accelerate the Indian economy and making India as Atmanirbhar Bharat, and make Indian economy on the line of making Indian economy the largest economy in the world. I'm fully confident, and that's the reason that I'm very much hopeful about the budget. Once again, I'm giving my thanks to Hindu Business Line and all of your, the chief editor and all the journalists for giving me opportunity to give my thoughts to you, to present to you. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you very much, Gadkariji. That's a very interesting, very impressive list of achievements that you spoke about, especially on roads and highways and infrastructure investments that your ministry is driving and your government is driving. I have only a couple of questions for you, which, if you're willing to answer, I can ask them. Do you have the time, sir?
Yes, no problem. You can ask me.
Excellent. Taking off from your speech itself, the long list of projects that are currently on, especially in roads, tunnels, and bridges and other things, it requires a lot of financing. The finance minister, of course, has been quite generous, as you said, and she'll hopefully continue to be generous too. But she has her own constraints, and there's only so much money can be coming from the budget. So what are the other sources that you're looking at? In this context, I wanted to ask you about the asset monetization pipeline, which was announced last year, and which has taken off in some industries like power, as we also mentioned. But we're not seeing road projects yet coming out on the asset monetization pipeline. What are your plans there for that?
Actually, the monetization target, the 26% target is given to the road sector. Already we have monetized the project more than 35,000 crore. And we are receiving good response. We don't have any problem for that. But now our idea is all Canadian pension fund, foreign investors, they are taking the projects. But my feeling is we should take the cooperation of Indian people, particularly the small people, who can invest minimum 1 lakh rupees into our road project. And for that reason, we have already developed project-wise a new model. We are waiting for approval from SEBI. And a common man can invest in NHI, particularly in this project and project to project. And we are trying to assure him a good income. My feeling is to give it to 7.5 to 8% assured income to him. So this is the idea in our mind. Still, it's not finalized, by which the small people will invest. And already every year we are making the road of 5 lakh crores. Already the finance minister is giving the budget 1,20,000 crore. But you know that the success story of the NHI is we don't have money problem. The bankers are now every time giving us the offer, and now just we received the loan of 5.85 interest, 25,000 we received from the bank. Every time we are getting good fund from bankers. We don't have any financial problem. Our projects are economically viable. Presently, our total income is 40,000 crore. And within 5 years, it will go up to 1,40,000 crores. And we are monetizing the project. We are getting the money, and we are working on different models, BOT, hybrid annuity. A lot of new models are there. There is a very, very good response. And particularly the foreign investment, there is a direct 100% investment allowed in infrastructure, particularly road sector. But my interest is to giving this benefit to the poor people of this country who can invest their economy, because India, we have problem regarding pension economy, regarding share economy, and regarding insurance economy. We need to develop more. And for that reason, if our small people like constable, peon, government worker, or any factory worker, if he can invest in infrastructure, he will get 7.5% or 8% returns on that. There can be a great thing that he is contributing for development of infrastructure in the country. At the same time, he is benefited from that. The senior citizens, they are investing their money in the banks, and they are getting a rate of interest something 6.5 or 7%. But if they get good returns from it, it can be a great thing for the senior citizen to get assured returns from NHI bonds. So this is the idea in my mind, and we are on the process. If the SEBI clear it, we will go for the capital market, and 100% we will get investment from the small people of India, the farmer, the peon, the constables, small government servants. They can invest 1 lakh or more than that. So it can be a great opportunity for Indian people. And my intention is to take the advantage of taking cooperation of the small, poor people and make them rich, give them opportunity to get money from infrastructure. It is a win-win position. We are making infrastructure in the country for the benefit of the society. And at the same time, the benefit is going to the poor people of the society who are investing in that. That is exactly the philosophy and vision in my mind. And we are working on that. Presently, we don't have any problem from the investor. The Canadian fund, the insurance fund, the Australian Macquarie company, they are all coming to us. We don't have any problem. We are receiving a tremendous response from the investor. But my idea is, if this is going to be benefited to the foreign investor, why we should not give this opportunity to the small and poor people of our country? And that is exactly the inspiration and motivation in my mind, that how it can be helpful to them in a win-win situation where they can invest in the road construction and they will get benefit more than anywhere in the market. So that is exactly the idea, and we don't have any problem. We are working fast. Our monetization, all examples are successful examples, and it can be really a good thing and great pride for me. NHI is AAA rating. It is the highestly reputed, recognized, and respectable organization, not only in India, but in the world. That is exactly a success story of NHI.
Thank you. That's quite expansive and interesting to hear whatever you said just now on the financing options. I would now take you to the other part of your speech where you spoke extensively on automobile industry and ethanol and flex engines and stuff. But the other part of this story is the scrappage, creating demand, phasing out old vehicles, and that will help the environment and also increase output for automobile manufacturers, increase their business. Now, we know that you have set up 1 or 2 scrappage centers in the country, but what are your plans for increasing these scrappage centers and for promoting, pushing people to scrap their vehicles, more incentivizing them, like giving tax breaks to if you change an old vehicle and that kind of stuff?
Actually, we need 1 scrapping center at least in 1 district, and some of the district we need 2 to 3 scrapping centers. After 15 years, our policy is now already declared. We are going to establish all the scrapping center, creating more employment potential. The most important part of this scrapping policy is, presently we are importing aluminum. We are importing, even steel is also a problem. Copper is a problem. We are importing copper. Plastic somewhere we are importing. So by this scrapping, we can get steel, aluminum, copper, and rubber. Everything will be available with a very, very lower rate, by which we can reduce the cost of components by 25 to 30%. And that is to be a great advantage to Indian automobile industry for international market. The second thing is we have 12 major ports. At the time when I was shipping minister, we have taken a decision to increase the draft up to 18 meter. Now 6 to 7 port we have, the draft is 18 meter. It means that you can take the ship of 2 lakh ton. So from the world, lot of this automobile waste is available, scrap vehicles are available. We can import that to India with a cheaper rate, and by which we will get the aluminum, copper, steel, rubber, and everything. Presently, we are importing aluminum, we are importing copper, we are importing steel, we are importing lot of plastic, rubber. And because of this, availability of this raw material is going to increase the potential of our automobile industry to get more profit for them. At the same time, presently, these vehicles are now outdated. After 15 years, one bus or one truck of diesel, whatever the fuel cost is there, the 3 new buses will have same cost. So that is the reason, as per the technology and efficiency is concerned, we will reduce the pollution and economic viability. LNG, CNG is the fuel for the future. I just first tractor in India. It's from my agriculture family. We have got a tractor and we have converted onto bio CNG. So our saving is 1 lakh rupees per year, and we are making bio CNG from parali, rice straw. 5 ton of parali is given 1 ton of bio CNG. So it is going to establish the new industry in the rural and agriculture India, which is going to create more employment potential. At the same time, it is import substitute, cost effective, pollution free, and indigenous. We are making ethanol, we are making bio LNG or bio CNG from biomass, bio waste, particularly from rice straw. Then we are making green hydrogen from sewage water, where we can, municipal corporation can convert their sewage water by using solar rooftop and windmill, and using that power for that and making green hydrogen from that. I have just taken one green hydrogen car is with me in Delhi, and next month, because of COVID, I am in Nagpur. We are going to launch a first pilot project of car. Car is from Toyota. They have given this car to me. Car is in Delhi, and we will take the green hydrogen from Faridabad, Indian Oil. And we are going to start the first pilot project to prove that it can be possible, that you can run with the green hydrogen. And green hydrogen is the fuel for the future. So the pollution is a big problem. Air pollution, water pollution, and sound pollution. Being a transport minister, I have a highest priority for removing all these pollutions. So 100%, when I was minister for Ganga, we have successfully have a good project in Mathura. By using 80 MLD sludge of Mathura, we are converting into making the water from that, recycling all the water given to Indian Oil. They are giving 20 crore rupees per year. The Triveni Engineering, the company from South, now they are doing that project. And first time it is to be proven that from wastewater, sewage water, from the you can convert good water and it can be useful for industry. And 40% from the subsidy given by the government and 60% from the investor. Hybrid annuity. So even in the solid waste management and liquid waste management, we can go for hybrid annuity project where 60% of the investments coming from the private partner. And that can be a great thing to create more employment potential. It is going to resolve our pollution problem, water pollution, air pollution problem. And it is a theory of conversion of waste into wealth. I am always telling people 2 philosophy. One is knowledge, innovation, entrepreneurship, science, technology, research, skill, and successful practices. We name it as knowledge, and conversion of knowledge into wealth is the future. And the second important thing is conversion of waste into wealth. No one is waste. It is depending upon the vision. It is depending upon the technology that any type of waste it may be, you can convert that waste into wealth. And that is exactly the policy behind all this thing. I'm confident that we are now making for Jaivik agriculture, making organic farming. There are a lot of new experiments from definitely that Joamrut experiment. A lot of things are moving. Our priorities, development of agriculture is the most important priority for the government. We need to take it up to 20% contribution of agriculture in our growth, GDP growth. And that's the reason that creating more agro-process industries, create more employment potential in the rural, agriculture, and tribal area, and 115 aspirant districts. For the forest material also, we can use it. We can develop the new industry there. And this is exactly, we are working on bamboo. So Bhima bamboo from Karnataka is very popular, giving 200 ton of bamboo per acre after 2 years. So that is going to change the total situation in the agriculture sector. So these are the new initiatives taken by our government, 100%, which is going to be proved as import substitute, cost effective and pollution free, and creating more wealth, more employment potential and development in rural tribal area, particularly 115 aspirant districts.
Thank you. That's interesting. One last question before I let you go, Minister. This is on the road projects, which you mentioned, quite a long laundry list of road projects which are being implemented. Very interesting ones, very impressive ones, Delhi-Mumbai corridor especially. But people down south feel that we don't get enough of those projects, except Chennai-Bangalore highway, which work has just started. We don't seem to be getting any of those big projects that you're talking about. Chennai-Mumbai is a very poorly connected corridor. Chennai-Hyderabad is barely connected. Now, why are we not investing in these kind of projects also to develop industries alongside?
First of all, we are already planning for that. We are starting the project. I am telling you just a thing, from coming from Delhi to Chennai, you have to come to Mumbai and Pune. And Pune, there are two ways, from Pune to Solapur and Pune to Kolhapur, going to Bangalore and going to Chennai. But now we are changing from Surat. We are making a new green express highway of 40,000 crore from Surat to Nashik, Nashik to Ahmednagar, and Ahmednagar to Solapur. You don't need to go for Mumbai and Pune. So that is going to reduce the pollution in Mumbai and Pune. And we are just starting, now we have decided to start the work of this project. And this is going to be a game changer. From Solapur, we can go to Cochin, we can go to Bangalore, we can go to Bangalore, we can go to Trivandrum, we can go to Chennai, we can go to Hyderabad. So it will be an independent connectivity without Mumbai and Pune. It's going to resolve the problem. My problem is we are doing a lot of work in Mysore-Bangalore Express Highway. We are working. Now in the next 2-3 months, I'm going to inaugurate that function. We are going to inaugurate that road. Now my problem is related with Tamil Nadu. We are facing big problem related with the getting aggregate, getting material, getting forest clearances. I already requesting the Chief Minister to resolve this issue. Particularly in Tamil Nadu, we are facing a lot of problem. Our work is stopped. We are not getting even the different type of aggregate for the construction. They are giving us permission of 3 months. It's very difficult. Somewhere it is a part in the demo, in the bureaucratic system. It never get the permission. That's why the works are stopped. So I already requested to Chief Minister and the Minister and the people and even Chief Secretary. We are waiting for, if the cooperation is good from the state side, I am assuring you that I will give a lot of priority to development of road infrastructure in Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Kerala. The Kerala, we have a lot of problem with the land acquisition. But the Kerala Chief Minister is very, very proactive and he is taking a lot of decision and helping us. We are now giving a lot of project to Kerala. Karnataka also, we are doing a lot of projects. Andhra, Telangana, we have just sanctioned a lot of roads. I have got a list of the project. I will give it to you. Connecting to Hyderabad to Chennai and all South India. There are a lot of projects we have. It is on the list and we are already working on that. You ask anybody in any district, anywhere in the South India about national highway, people will give you the feedback. And that is exactly our achievement, that anywhere, no one will talk anything against us. We are transparent, time-bound, result-oriented, and corruption-free. With this program, I am again requesting Honorable Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, please go take the review of all the projects and cooperate us. And we will 100%, there is no money shortage. We are ready to give 1,000 crores of rupees to Tamil Nadu and develop all type of road project. I don't have any problem. When I was minister in shipping and port, I developed all this Tuticorin, Chennai and all the ports in that area. My highest priority for development. Even we are facing one big project, starting a flyover from Chennai port and taking it to 2-level flyover to resolve the traffic jam problem in Chennai. I'm also working on that. So we are ready for that. But somewhere we need some cooperation from the state government. Without that, we cannot do it. Somewhere, I'm not talking politically, but I will request you people, and particularly for the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu and the ministers and MPs, let's please look into it. when the central government is ready to give the fund, ready to give the road project, let us resolve the small issues. 100% we will change the total infrastructure of Tamil Nadu, which can be Tamil Nadu is the fastest growing state in the country. Lot of industrial development is there. Lot of export will increase, and it creates more employment potential and jobs and growth to the Tamil Nadu, where I'm very much positive and I want to support it.
Thank you so much, sir, for being so frank and addressing the concerns that we have here. And I do hope that your voice will be heard by the powers that be. So thank you once again for sparing your time with us. You're just recovering and you're taking time off to attend this pre-budget event. And wish you all the best and more power to you for doing more projects and helping develop India. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thanks. I now hand over the floor to Devangana.
Thank you very much, Gadkari sir. Your words give us the confidence that a high economic growth is not far away. We now move on to the next part of the event. I request Ms. Sunita Reddy, Managing Director of Apollo Hospitals, to give the keynote address. Ms. Reddy has held several leadership positions, including co-chairperson of Healthcare Subcommittee CII, and is a member of the National Committee on Healthcare. Over to you, ma'am.
So good morning, everyone. Such a pleasure to be with you this morning as we look forward to the budget 2022. It's been quite a challenging period during this pandemic. We've had 24 months of challenging times, but I believe that we have definitely come out stronger. The second quarter showed a growth of 12.6% in our GDP, and I think that is heartening. And while we're expected to close the year with 6.6%, I think we are now facing the third wave of the pandemic. However, India has become stronger and we've learned to meet these challenges. I would like to look at the budget and the challenges we have before us in two parts. First is to say that, like many of us, we have huge expectations from this budget, but the budget really sets the tone in terms of consistency of what the government will do. There have been many announcements outside of the budget, but we continue to look forward to the tenor and the tone and the commitment of the government and its priorities, which we will see in this budget. The first, I think, would be is to address this large situation of the large problem of unemployment. 8% of India is unemployed. And to me, that is a very meaningful challenge, because if we can focus on those industries that would give employment to the unemployed, we would definitely see incredible increase in GDP. And I say this because, while capital inflows we've seen over the past 2 years have really increased, it is the human aspect of it that has become increasingly important. We see this in education, we see it in healthcare. And I also think that this is one of the reasons why we need to focus on agriculture. The urban migration in agriculture is a problem that needs to be addressed. We need to look at the agriculture sector and see how we can incentivize them so that they can export for the country rather than encourage urban migration from the towns to the cities. I think the second part of it is to look at skilling. How can we upskill our people so that they can take up jobs in manufacturing? This, again, the government has done a lot through the PLI schemes that it has taken, but much more needs to be done. And proof of that is really, if you look at the global supply chain, there was a report by Nomura that said out of the 54 components that were missing, that were coming out of China in the global supply chain, only 3 of those were then relocated to India. The rest moved to Vietnam, Taiwan, Korea. We need to do much, much more. I believe that this is a huge opportunity for India and one that we cannot afford to lose. Having said that, in my mind, we should never let a good opportunity, a crisis go to waste, because there is always an opportunity. And I think infrastructure creation, which each of the governments is looking very closely at, is an area where the investments need to be made, where people should be encouraged to build roads, to go ahead with the airports, so that not only are jobs created, but meaningful work is done, so that it improves trade. The third priority clearly is signaling support for the ideas and the sectors that will drive growth in the next century. And this is clearly clean energy. It's creating hubs that will manufacture services that will serve Indian industry, from logistics to fintech to next generation e-commerce and digitally enabled services. I believe the government has done so much in the past 2 years, and we've seen the growth of just 45 unicorns that have happened in this 1 year alone. So the opportunity is tremendous, and I'm sure that the government will continue to support this. In our focus on creating a $5 trillion economy, we must look at healthcare, because not only is it important for the growth of the nation, but for the economy as well. Healthcare should be the central focus of this, not only this budget, but it should be the center of the economy. And I say this because it's important that infrastructure is created in this sector. I believe that 20 years ago, the government gave IT services a national priority focus. And when they did that, they gave them tax holidays of 15 years, they gave them capital subsidies, and with that, the IT sector really grew. Healthcare deserves that position, more so because we are a nation where 70% of the healthcare spending is out of pocket. It is time to look at healthcare differently. It is also time to look at the fact that, the healthcare sector needs many investments in infrastructure as well. We have a huge demand supply gap when it comes to beds. This is the time to create infrastructure for the future, not just for now, but for the future. And we can only do that if the GST regime is really thoughtfully looked at, so that to support healthcare. And I say this because it's important that there are three aspects of GST that affect us. One is that it makes healthcare expensive. We do not have the set-off against the input tax. And by doing so, the healthcare industry is absorbing all these taxes, and some as high as 18%. So if the government could give us either 0 or a 5%, I think it will benefit the sector immensely. The second area is the GST that happens in the health insurance space. I believe that all healthcare related expenditure should be GST exempt, or maybe, rationalized to 5%. And I say this for two reasons. One is that we need to look at preventive healthcare. I think this pandemic has shown us now more than ever the importance of looking after your own good health. The second is insurance. The penetration of private insurance is so poor. It's probably time for employers to mandatorily pick up the insurance of their employees. It's time for professionals to take up insurance on their own behalf. And it's time to look at a special insurance for senior citizens. The government can only do so much, and I believe that Ayushman Bharat has made great strides. But it's time now for the government and the private sector to come together to rationalize GST on insurance and healthcare spending. My third ask is to really look at what more can we do for healthcare. We are currently, India provides the best quality healthcare in the world, and we do so at 1/10 of the cost. What can we do to incentivize healthcare so that we can attract patients from all over the world? We have already done so successfully. Patients from 147 countries come to Apollo. But I believe there is a huge opportunity in creating medical value travel. And working with the government, we should be able to to do so much more in that space. We should be able to invest in infrastructure without having to worry about the GST on REITs. We should be able to create these institutions that enable us to invest into healthcare infrastructure. We should also be able to look at ways to incentivize healthcare institutions, and I've said that earlier. Look at taxation, give us a 15-year holiday, look at capital subsidies, and see what more we can do for the healthcare sector, because it was done for the IT sector many years ago. And if you look at the IT sector today, it is vibrant, it is the best in the world. And I believe that this is the time for the healthcare sector to take its own place, not only in the economy, but in the Indian landscape. This is probably a time for the Indian Renaissance to happen. It happened in Europe after the Dark Ages, and I think we've had more than 24 months of a dark period that is behind us. We are seeing evidence of the Renaissance in the digital space. The Renaissance can happen in many sectors around us, from fintech to digital to healthcare to infrastructure. What we need to do is to work to build together to build the vibrant India of the future. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We move on to the panel discussions now. Our first panel is on balancing fiscal prudence and accelerating economic growth. I now hand over the floor to Shishir Kumar Sinha, Deputy Editor, The Hindu BusinessLine, who will be moderating the panel. At the end of the panel, there will be a Q&A session. So do post your questions in the Q&A box. Over to you, Shishir.
Thank you, Devangana, and good morning to each and everyone who is attending this webinar. And I especially welcome the three panelists, Dr. Ajit Ranade, Sonal Verma, and Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy. Let me start with Dr. Ranade. Since we are at a time when the global situation is changing at a very rapid pace, so the three critical issues at global level, one is of course that Federal Reserve meeting that everybody is expecting. The second one is of course the crude prices. We saw that crude prices surged to a 7-year high on Wednesday, and now it has slipped a bit, but still it's on a very high level. And the third one is about the geopolitical situation, especially I'm talking about Russia. So, Dr. Ranade, how do you see this these development, and what kind of impact you see on the Indian fiscal position?
Thank you very much, Shishir, and thank you for BusinessLine to invite me to this panel. Apart from those three that you mentioned, Shishir, that is the Fed tightening and the oil prices and the geopolitical flashpoints, including Ukraine and Taiwan, I guess you implied.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that the global economy actually is doing well. According to me, we are almost like in a boom time. I don't know how long the growth will sustain, but surely two of the largest economies in the world, which is USA and China, together we are going to grow at around 5%. They represent almost 40% of global GDP, or between 38%. So that's a huge momentum or a push to the global economy. And no wonder that will reflect into enhanced trade and exporting prospects, especially for developing economies like India. So while the three adverse developments that you mentioned, the Fed tightening will mean that there will be some risk that money will flow out of developing economies, emerging markets back into the US. There is that fear, what we saw back in 2013, 8 years ago, which is famously known as the taper tantrum. This time it won't be a tantrum, but certainly there will be some pressure. Oil prices continue to be volatile. They go up to $87, $88, then suddenly there is some, development and they go down by 10%. So in that sense, I think they continue to be volatile and they're somewhat higher than last year. But I believe our current account situation, when oil prices go up, we are affected in three ways. Our import bill goes up, our exchange rate is under pressure, there is an inflationary impact on the economy, and of course, because subsidies are related to oil prices, so subsidy burden also goes up. But I believe our situation in that sense, the current account situation is much better, partly because capital inflows which come in to offset the current account deficit are strong and will continue to be strong next year. So I think we can sustain we can perhaps survive oil prices remaining in the mid 80s. It will be better if they come down to high 70s, but so long as they don't touch 100, I think we should be okay. On geopolitical flashpoints in the world, of course, they are connected with overall sentiment. They can also affect growth prospects. So I would say, on balance, the global situation, even though you mentioned those 3 points, to me is somewhat favorable, given that the global economy growth rate and therefore exporting prospects, and exports being an important driver of growth, are actually positive for India.
Okay. Sonal, let us come to the fiscal number. We all are talking about fiscal deficit, 6.8% for the current fiscal. There is expectation that it may be slightly lower on that. There are views also that it may go up. And if we talk about the next year, the talk is about the fiscal consolidation. What is your assessment of fiscal deficit for the current fiscal as well as for the next fiscal?
Yeah, thanks, Shishir, and thanks a lot for inviting. Very happy to be here. So, I mean, as far as this ongoing fiscal is concerned, there are lots of moving parts, but I would say net-net, it does look like the government should be able to meet the 6.8% target. I mean, during the course of the year, net tax revenues have surprised on the upside, and we think there'll be nearly 2.5 trillion above the budgeted targets. Non-tax revenues have also been high because of extra dividend proceeds, including from the Reserve Bank of India. And of course, the nominal GDP growth, which the budget had assumed at 14.4%, and basis the advance estimate, it's close to 17.5%. So there are factors that actually suggest there's room for a lower deficit. But we know that during the course of the year, the government has also announced the second wave, support package. The subsidy burden on food and fertilizer is going to be much more than what they'd budgeted. The allocations under the Rural Employment Guarantee are also much more than they had budgeted. So, and disinvestment, I mean, that's the biggest question mark as we speak, including whether LIC is going to go through or not. So net-net, I would say this year looks like a 6.8. Now, for FY23, on the basis of the fiscal glide, well, there isn't a formal glide path, but the assumption we have is the deficit, there will be a marginal fiscal consolidation. So, deficit comes down by a 0.5 percentage points relative to the 6.8 that, we think will show up in the revised estimate. Now, specifically on FY23, versus FY22, the nominal growth thrust is unlikely to be as strong. And, excise taxes, which were a big boom for government excise duty collections, because of the cuts that were announced late last year, that's also going to be, less of a benefit in FY23 for the full year. And on the expenditure side, I mean, obviously the pandemic is not over. The government wants to push on Capex. As you were asking, Ajit, geopolitics and oil also imply that the subsidy burden will remain quite elevated. So there are still, factors that suggest that the pace of consolidation will be marginal, because you still need to support growth next year as well.
Okay. Sonal, you have given a very interesting observation about the fiscal consolidation, and that's my next question to Professor Bhanumurthy. Professor Bhanumurthy, at this moment, we are passing through the third year, which is full of challenges. So when we talk about the fiscal consolidation and growth, how to make a balance between that, between these two, and which one should be given more priority, fiscal consolidation or growth?
Thank you, Shishir. Happy to be part of this panel with Ajit and Sonal. With regard to the fiscal consolidation and economic growth, I really don't see that they are two different objectives. In fact, they are same in my view. And, unfortunately, I think there are a lot of misunderstanding about fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation, by definition or philosophy, it is not a fiscal compression mechanism. Rather, it is an expenditure switching mechanism. And in fact, if you look at the original Frbm Act, you're actually shifting the expenditure from revenues to the capital. and that's how you are expected to have a slightly higher growth. So the both fiscal consolidation and growth, they are all synonymous in my view. Having worked for this, the 13th Finance Commission, 14th and 15th FRBM roadmaps, please believe me that they are true, both are same. And if you can achieve fiscal consolidation as per the original FRBM Act of 2003, you should be having a much better growth of 8 to 9%. And we have done this study for the 15th Finance Commission. It is there on the website. Now, what's happening right now is the kind of fiscal consolidation that we are following is actually we are following the FRBM Amendment Act of 2018, where it completely dilutes the 2003 Act. Okay. Now, the 2018 Amendment Act is actually contractionary. That is not the philosophy of the original FRBM Act. So again, I want to repeat, these two are not competing, they are complementing kind of policy intervention.
Okay. Dr. Ranade, one thing when we talk about FISC, one thing which comes into mind, especially in the common man, is about the tax benefit, tax, some kind of exemption. So at this moment, do you see any kind of tax relief, whether we talk about corporate or whether we talk about individuals?
Yeah, on the corporate taxes, if you remember 2019 September, we announced a reduction of corporate taxes. And in fact, we announced a new category of 15% corporate income tax for new manufacturing units. Now, this is in line with actually our ASEAN peers, and pretty much it is in a very competitive range globally. I don't think it is possible to go below 15%. And especially at a time when globally now there is consensus led by the US Secretary of Treasury that there in fact should be a minimum taxation. If you remember,
that's the OECD.
That's right.
Thing.
They've got now a consensus among more than 100 countries that now we need to actually have a consensus on minimum taxation, because there's been a lot of tax shopping and tax dodging, and OECD has been seized of this, of what they call the base erosion concern. So I don't think on corporate income tax there is room to reduce, because I think that we have really on individual income tax there is now a conundrum, because really speaking we now need to speak in terms of the not just individual versus corporate, but rather direct tax and indirect tax. The total tax collection in India consists of direct and indirect taxes. Now, personally, I believe the progress of development for any country is how the share of taxes should be increasingly direct taxes and not indirect taxes. The reason is very simple, because indirect taxes are regressive, and indirect taxes hurt the poor much more than the rich, relatively speaking.
Yep.
What I mean by that, indirect taxes, suppose you're buying a masala dosa for 100 rupees, and the GST on that is, let's say, 10% or whatever, 12%, let's say. So you pay 12 rupees on that dosa, whether you're a rich person or a poor person, male or female, Hindu or Muslim, it's 12 rupees. Now, 12 rupees will pinch you more if your wallet size is smaller. So that's why it's very simple. Indirect taxes hurt the poor relatively more than the rich. So we should be progressing towards a mix where the greater share of taxes come from direct taxes. Now, what are direct taxes? Income tax, corporate income tax, capital gains tax, and all those things. I think that unfortunately in the last couple of years, the trend has been that the share of indirect taxes has gone up. And we are still struggling with a GST rate which is at 18%, when in fact the Prime Minister, the Chief Economic Advisor, former Chief Economic Advisor, his own report recommendation said that it should be closer to 14%.
Yes.
And the reason for that is because half of GDP is outside the GST net yet, more than half. So as we expand the tax net for indirect taxes, I think there is room to decrease the percentage. Of course, GST is not in the domain of the Union Finance Budget. It is a domain of the GST Council. So to answer your question about individual income taxes, I think maybe there is some room for exemption, perhaps that 50,000 rupees may go up to 75,000. But I think it's only tinkering, because we have to be also cognizant of the fact that India's tax to GDP ratio is low, and especially direct tax to GDP ratio is among the lowest in the world. So of course, our per capita income is also, $2,000, $2,500. We have some way to go, but we don't have much room to decrease in individual income taxes.
Okay. Sonal, let us talk about the expenditure thing. If I can remember correctly, for the fiscal year 2021, when the budget was being presented for the fiscal year 21-22, At that time, the one big issue was that how much fiscal deficit can be curtailed from the original level. So at that time, out of say 101 demands for grant, 67, there were reduction in the 67. Now, again, this year, we are talking about how to reduce the fiscal deficit, how to bring down the fiscal deficit. So do you see some areas where the expenditure could be curtailed?
I mean, overall, Shishir, I think the wriggle room per se is less, because if you, I mean, revenue expenditure is nearly 85% of total spending. So, your salaries, subsidies, interest payments, etc. And really 15% is capital expenditure, which you don't want to compromise on. So, you're working with limited degrees of freedom here. But I would say that, some of the strategies that we've followed over the last few years, we need to continue down that track to create, savings on the expenditure side. So one is really, leveraging on technology to reduce leakages and better monitoring in terms of the expenditure allocation that we make. Second is, greater usage of the direct benefit transfer, which we are gradually expanding to cover more schemes, more ministries, more subsidies. This is already leading to substantial savings on the expenditure side, and there's scope to expand this even further to cover even more schemes going forward. Outside of this, I would say, there are two things potentially. One is looking at, rationalization and consolidation of some of the existing schemes, because there's a lot of duplication in schemes, some of the centrally sponsored schemes or central schemes. So perhaps, merging or just, if it isn't leading to much benefit, stopping some of those schemes. And, I think, what you mentioned for FY21, which is sort of reprioritizing spending depending on the situation. So, right now, if we need to allocate more to spending on Capex, then perhaps the allocations to Ministry of Culture or Tourism may not need to be as much if you're in the midst of a pandemic. So it needs to be a mix of some of these tactical and strategic things that we should do. One thing, though, I would flag is that it's not easy to spend also, right? I mean, if you look at this year's capital expenditure budget of the center versus where they are tracking, they are likely to spend almost 1 lakh crore less than what they have budgeted. So the the administrative and execution capacity to spend on some of the projects is also sort of quite limited. So that's one thing we need to step up on while we are reorienting the expenditure side.
Yeah, Sonal, if I can just take figures from Controller General of Account, which says that in the first 8 months, just for 49.8, or if I say 50% of total capital expenditure of the budget estimate that has been spent. So you have just 4 months to spend 50%. The good thing has happened that yesterday, Finance Ministry relaxed the fourth quarter norm, that's the 33% and 15% for the month of March. So that may give some relief. Now I'm coming to Professor Bhanumurthy. If I can remember, Professor Bhanumurthy, there was a report prepared by you in which you talked about what kind of benefit we have because of the capital expenditure and what kind of number we have because of the revenue expenditure. And if I can remember correctly, it is something around 2.54 and 1 or less than 1 in terms of revenue expenditure. In fact, the fiscal year 22 budget also talked a lot about what your report said. And that is why we saw increase in the capital expenditure by 34% to 5 lakh crore plus. So now at this moment, what you expect when we are seeing less capital expenditure in FY22? So what should be a strategy for FY23 in terms of capital expenditure?
Yeah, thank you, Sir, for referring to that study. Just to add to what Sonal has said, I think this unspent issue is not just specific to capital expenditure alone. It is for all the expenditure. So we should not single out only the capital expenditure component. Having said that, this year particularly, I mean, as anybody heard Minister Nitin Gadkari's speech just before this technical session, in fact, the kind of numbers he's showing out, I know we are actually in the right track in terms of capital expenditure, especially on the roadways, airports, and all those things. So I would expect, to continue the kind of fiscal policy stance that was adopted in the last year. In fact, when we are talking about the budget, I don't think we need to limit ourselves to just next year. I think the budget, the last year budget, rightly focused the medium-term target of bringing down the public debt to GDP ratio. For me, one fiscal number which is very important and which should be kept in mind when we talk about next 4 to 5 years is the public debt to GDP ratio. How are we going to bring down the public debt to GDP ratio from 90% to 70% or whatever it is that 15th Finance Commissioner suggested? So this is exactly what I've been saying. I think if you know this, that the returns on the expenditure, the type of expenditure that you make, and I think you should be able to manage your expenditures much better, and also you can target the medium-term path. So that's exactly where this 2.45 number becomes very relevant. So if you can, in fact, that is actually the crux of the whole Frbm Act. The returns on the capital expenditure is going to be more, and the GDP is going to be expected to be higher than what we have seen in the past, and then the revenues are going to be more, and that will have more space for revenue expenditure. That is the whole mechanism. Okay, the causation is from capital expenditure to growth to revenues to revenue expenditure. I think that is the path I think we need to follow, and I would expect the finance minister will continue the good thing that they have started in the last budget.
Okay. Dr. Ranade, one thing is there that earlier we were talking about reaching the fiscal deficit of 4.5 by 25-26, if I can remember correctly. Now, from now onwards, we are now in a position that we cannot go for a lower fiscal deficit, or I mean, rather I say lowering the expenditure. At this moment, it is not possible. So what kind of fiscal roadmap you can expect in this budget?
That's a very difficult question, Shishir. And by the way, I must compliment on your question. You very thorough homework and very sharp questions. Though this is difficult because we are, barely coming out of the pandemic. No doubt, we have a good bounce this year. I also mentioned that the global economy seems to be doing well, which can be a benefit from the export point of view. But there are concerns in the rest of the world also. There are concerns whether how much of the growth is sustainable. Is it going to last for a year or two, or is it longer? There are signs of some slowing down of momentum both in China and USA. And in India also, our labor force participation rate is very low. So, there's a whole class of workers who seem to be discouraged. They're not even looking for work. There's unemployment problem. There's underemployment problem. And we are still, everybody now is thinking about this K-shaped recovery. While it's true that corporate results are better, profitability is better, our stock markets are doing well, the fiscal situation has improved, but the K-shape, the lower part of the K, the informal sector, the rural sector, the services, hospitality, tourism, the mall workers, so with that, if that is the situation, then we cannot ignore that the fiscal burden on the government will continue to support, if not actually growth momentum, but also welfareism. Remember the Pradhan Mantri, Gram Kalyan Anna Yojana, the free food grain, which started back in April 2020, has been extended all the way to March 2022. 2 full years of free food grains, and they doubled the quantity. They doubled the allocation to 10 kilos. This has cost 2.6 lakhs crores. It's the largest free food distribution scheme in the world. Okay. Then the NREGA, demand on NREGA keeps on going above 1 lakh crores. This year it was budgeted to be 75,000 crores. It's going to cross 1 lakh crores. The labor code, the labor reforms, which were supposed to be notified last year, the finance minister announced by April 1, we'll do it. It's been postponed again, I think, because of concerns that we are not yet ready. So given that context, I think we will see the fiscal deficit situation continue to be at this level. Remember, and Mr. Professor Bhanumurthy keeps reminding that original target was 3%, not 4.5. But I think it'll take some while for us to come to those levels. And I fully support what he said, that when he said fiscal consolidation and growth go together, what he meant is that they feed on each other. When the fiscal deficit is lower, there's much more investable funds, loanable funds available for the rest of the country, and that's how it supports growth. But to get to that virtuous cycle, we need to get out of this post-pandemic stress. And that may very well take 1 or 2 years. Thankfully, the good sign is that all the good work of the reforms, whether it was stabilization of GST, whether it is, the asset monetization program, all the things that Minister Gadkari talked about, some of those things will start paying off, I think. The effect of Capex and also, but it'll still be 1 or 2 years where we'll have to watch out, where we'll have to live with maybe 6 or 5% fiscal deficits.
Okay. Sonal, normally when we talk about goods and services tax, it is not part of the budget. I agree with that. But there has always been a discussion that what kind of changes we can think in GST. What we are expecting that immediately after budget, there will be a meeting of GST Council which will talk about rationalization of rates. At this moment, we all know that the number of rates we have, the structure we have of GST is not the ideal one. So we have 6 rates, 8 rates, which are not a good thing to do. So what kind of rationalization we can expect, and considering we need to think about, as Dr. Ranade was talking about, the regressive taxation. So we also have to think how to give benefit, how to give some kind of relief through the indirect taxes, and that can be done by the GST Council. So what kind of rationalization do you expect in GST post-budget?
Well, I think, Shishir, this is more likely to be maybe a 6-month out process than immediately a February post-Feb process, because the revenue implications, the growth implications, the inflation implications of these changes, are quite substantial. So I think the decision will take much longer than just a couple of months. There are 2 separate aspects, actually. I think one, clearly, the GST revenues per se are doing well right now. The technology has stabilized. And therefore, the next step, more from a structural standpoint, is greater simplification and rationalization, as you said. Which is, reducing the number of tax slabs, GST tax rate slabs we have, maybe merging some of the slabs together, like the 12 and the 18 one together, looking, at the goods and services that are still excluded from the GST net, including the political hot potatoes of petroleum, electricity, land, for instance. So in terms of the direction from a structural standpoint, I think this is the direction in which we clearly want to go. Now, from a more cyclical standpoint, it is really, the revenue pressure that states in particular are facing, which is a challenge. So can we rationalize the GST rates such that, as a consumer, I pay less, but as a state, you earn more? Is not clear that we'll be able to get there. So I think the risk, because we're coming from the pandemic and an economic slowdown, and states are already asking the center to extend the compensation cess for another 5 years, I think the risk in the near term is really an increase in tax rates at the margin. Because there's a need to course correct on the revenue and the fiscal side. 3% is not easy. Even 4.5%, I would say, is not easy by FY26 without additional revenue enhancing measures. But because any tax increase, even if, going from by a couple of percentage points, has huge inflationary impact. And as Ajit was saying, given it's an uneven recovery, we know that the lower income is already suffering because of income loss. You don't want a double whammy of higher inflation as well. So I think the actual implementation of this may have to wait for a better economic outlook before we look to course correct on the cyclical revenue side on GST. But otherwise, yes, simplification, merging of the tax slabs, getting more included items included in the GST tax net. I think broadly the direction is that's the direction in which we are traveling right now.
Okay. Sonal, you mentioned about the compensation thing, and FY23 is going to be critical from the state finances view, because after June 2022, they will not get any compensation on account of GST as of now. Professor Bhanumurthy, now the big question is that FY23 will bring a change in the compensation mechanism. And since the states are also having a tough time in terms of controlling their deficit, so what should they expect from this budget now?
Well, I think with regard to the compensation, the extension of the compensation, I think it's in a discussion stage. And it's not that just center decide that we are not going to continue the compensation.
No, as of now, I have said, of now, the position is this one.
Yeah, so we're hoping, at least we wish that, the compensation would continue for some more time. Because, I agree with the Sonal that this GST is largely stabilized, but unfortunately we just don't have that information. Even if you want to really do some kind of a studies to suggest what kind of areas, what are the areas where we can do some improvement, we just don't have the GST information. It's just we get once in a month what are the resources that we have. But I think more than that, for the states, they still need to have some kind of hand-holding when it comes to the GST indirect taxes. And at the same time, of course, there are a lot of demands to bring in some centrally sponsored schemes, because by increasing the share of devolution, the many responsibilities have been pushed to the states because you cut down on the CSS. So I think in the current situation, they need much more hand-holding than it was in the past, especially when there's so much of instability in the revenues. And if you look at the recent RBI report, also says that the fiscal marksmanship has completely collapsed at the state level. So they need a predictable resources so that they can plan better for the next year. So I think they would be very keenly looking at what is the devolution that they're going to get in the next financial year, and what would be the nominal GDP growth, because that becomes very important to really predict what would be the GST proceeds for the next year. The way that it happened this year, it was positively surprising because the nominal GDP growth was much more than what they have budgeted. So I think ultimately the revenue predictability becomes very important for state governments when they want to plan for the next year budget.
Okay. We have got so many questions, but before going to the audience question, one last set of questions to the panelists. Dr. Ranade, at this moment, we are talking about V-shaped recovery versus K-shaped recovery. Most of the economists are having a view that we are having V-shaped recovery, but there is also there are voices that we have K-shaped recovery. What is in your view? What kind of recovery we are expecting at this moment?
This alphabet is not important. I think the spirit of what I said earlier stands, that certainly the growth rate is higher. I mean, we had a GDP contraction because of the pandemic and the lockdown. So we definitely, we've come out of it and it's a positive growth rate. Whether that growth has benefited all sections of society, all income classes, all parts of the labor market, that's the question. So that in that sense, it is uneven. The benefits of this high growth are uneven. And I repeat what I said earlier. The corporate sector, especially, when you look at the large corporates, both listed and unlisted, they seem to have done well. There are sectors like, let's say, everything to connect with digital economy, healthcare, chemicals, because of the cleansing agents and that part of the economy. Metal prices globally, commodity prices are high. So all corporates connected in some ways with this have done well. Therefore, GST collections are very good, partly because of this, but also additionally because our imports are very high. Imports have grown by almost 50%. Now remember, there's a GST on imports. So GST collections are going up also because of high imports. And of course, FDI, we had this phenomenon of 70, 80, 100 unicorns. So the stock market health. So while that is also true, but on the other hand, I mentioned statistics like the labor force participation rate, the demand for rural employment guarantee work in rural areas, the necessity to extend the free food grain scheme for 800 million Indians all the way to March 22. So that tells me that the benefit of this growth is not yet even. It's quite uneven. And then, of course, we have heard of statistics like the World Inequality Report, which came out recently, whether it's wealth or income inequality. We keep hearing about India's ranking in the World Hunger Index, including child nutrition or malnutrition and hunger. So we cannot ignore those, and then remember, for almost 600 days, schools have been closed. The only students who are benefited are who are from the higher income classes who have better access to online connectivity. Connectivity can be quite poor in rural areas. So for 600 days, if your schools are closed, imagine the impact that has had on the education and human capital build-up. So therefore, I'm saying this growth has been is good, it's back, but we need to ensure that it's little more evenly spread and more equitably spread.
Okay. Sunil, what's your view on that?
I think we may be closer to the terminal phases of the pandemic, but the pandemic is not over. So the economy is able to handle the every incremental wave better, but the hard hit segments still get impacted. And therefore, I think, given the experience of other countries, I would say that, it remains sort of uneven even now. And this is, in various forms. I mean, goods have done well, services not so much. Urban has done well, rural not so much. Big has done well, small not so much. In fact, advanced economies have done well, emerging markets haven't done well. And I think this is important. If this sort of continues going forward, then essentially the risk is that the consumption recovery we see as we exit the pandemic may actually be much slower than we are anticipating right now, because the fiscal support purely from the consumption standpoint in EMs in the emerging markets has not been as much. And household savings are not as high at the lower income side. So there is a risk of a disappointment on the consumption side, which essentially is a challenge still, I think. And second is, and this is sort of more a broader comment on countries and particularly emerging economies, this unevenness and the scarring that we have seen and which may continue for some time, because, the pace of vaccination also differs quite a lot, between countries, can also lead to political repercussions. There's a study by the IMF which looks at past pandemics and finds that, when pandemics sort of come to an end, there's actually an increased risk of social unrest because of the dual hit on income and higher inflation. So I think essentially our objective, therefore, going forward should be to try to get domestic demand restarted so that you have a self-generating growth cycle that we can have going forward, cognizant of the risks that are there.
Okay. Professor Bhanumurthy, since we are having a budget and also at the same time, we are also going to have a state poll. So my question to you that, will this budget be guided by political thing or by the economic reality?
Okay, Shishir, can I just add to what the previous speaker said with regard to the K and V? So I would like to look at slightly differently. Now, if you look at the slowdown, as many of us know, the slowdown is both cyclical as well as structural, right? In fact, the structural part was slowing down much before the pandemic. But when you look at the recovery path, we have seen the cyclical component recovering faster. The structural component is actually taking more time. So I think we need to have policy measures to address these two separately, so that we get we come out of this uneven recovery that we are talking about. When it comes to your question regarding the state polls, It's especially, it's not just state polls. It is the polls that's happening in the biggest state in the country, that is Uttar Pradesh. I think a lot of bets are there. But having said that, as I said in the beginning, that the budget will have very limited to really have any kind of, adverse impact on the political outcomes at this stage, especially when if the finance minister continues what she has done in the last budget. So in that sense, there could be some announcements here and there for the 5 states, generally that every government utilize those kind of opportunities. But otherwise, I don't think there would be too much focus on the state polls at this juncture.
Now, I will take just a couple of questions from the audience, and one question is from Mr. Rahul Saxena, and that question is to both Ajit and Sonal. What he's asking, that everyone wants to expand direct taxpayers, but outcome has been suboptimal over the years. As per last year income tax review, only 10% people have disclosed income exceeding rupees 10 lakh. This is clearly anomaly. Now his question is, what are your suggestions to Finance Minister for bringing proprietary business, professional, black money under taxation, and what else can be done? Mr. Ranade and Sonal.
So I think Mr. Rahul, don't forget that the triangulation exercise is ongoing, and I think it is it's doing much better every year. For example, ever since they introduced taxes on dividends, because the payments are increasingly electronic and can be monitored at the dividend granting stage. So you have TDS on dividends. So we have now some idea. There used to be a time when there was no easy way to track dividend income. That was one of the reasons why dividend taxation was free, but of course for other reasons as well. So that again, now capital gains is notoriously difficult. So there are large, with a booming stock market, which has gone up by, I don't know, 50%, but none of that gain has come to the exchequer. Huge increase in the wealth, but none of the capital gains is not as easy to track as dividends. And I don't know if, people keep talking about black money and, underground economy. See, our income tax rates or our GST rates are moderate. I mean, they're not excessive like some of the, some other extreme countries. So the incentive to cheat, the incentive to dodge taxes. I'm not talking about illegal stuff like drugs and weapons. So I think we might be overestimating the amount of black economy. My guess is about 25%. So the real challenge is to expand the tax net. It's not just, I'm not talking about the black money, but it's just expanding the tax net. And remember, 15% of India's GDP is outside the tax net. As per the constitution, agriculture income cannot be taxed. And if you want to make that taxable, then you have to have a modification, amendment to the constitution. And it's a state, it infringes on state, it's a state issue also, constitutional issue. But even then, as I said, GST, for example, 50% of GDP is outside GST. Surely we can bring that into the GST net. And we should, I think, resist from the temptation to keep changing the brackets. There's something called bracket creep. Suddenly we made like up to 6 lakh income effectively is tax-free. No other country in the world, the average per capita income for man, woman, and child in India is only 1.3 or 1.4 lakhs. A family of 4 will make 5.6, and we keep minimum taxable starts at 6 lakhs. Imagine, big part of the, so we need to resist that temptation.
Okay, so Sonal, your take, please.
Sure, I think Ajit's covered everything and completely agree with him, particularly on the bracket creep point is extremely important, easy to do and, but very important in terms of broadening out the tax base. I would want to actually broaden out the question to overall on the revenue, since Ajit has talked about some of the bits already. I think the entire formalization of the economy we are gradually seeing, particularly with GST coming in, greater use of digital technologies, I think over a period of time should help us in terms of assessment and broadening out and better compliance on the tax side. Also, I think it's very important to make it simple. I mean, when you file your own income tax, it shouldn't be taking you this long to file through all the exemptions. I think just simplification, more digitization, greater formalization is extremely important. Outside of this, I would say, and just outside of this, I would say, there are broader economic themes that governments would like to follow, for which taxes can be useful. So, for instance, wealth tax for reduction in inequality, carbon tax for greater green or dissuading fossil fuel investments is something that a lot of countries are actually following. And I think what we are trying to do in India in terms of greater asset monetization and asset sales to fund growth, and therefore balancing fiscal consolidation and growth in that way is actually a strategy that we should also be following going forward.
Professor Bhanumurthy, there is a very interesting question from Mr. Nagaya, and he wants to know what checks and balances are put in place by the center to discipline those state governments which are not following or carrying the extent Frbm norms.
Well, I think there is a mechanism. In fact, for any additional borrowing that the state governments has to do, I think they need to get clearance from the central government as well as RBI, right? To that extent, there are. I think maybe he's from Andhra Pradesh. I think that is a state which is really facing a lot of issues in terms of the fiscal. In fact, they're not even allowed to go for overdraft, right? I think we do have within the framework in terms of the state government borrowing, there are limitations, and I think that seems to be working out. In fact, except one or two states, many states are within their limits in terms of the medium-term fiscal frameworks. So I know last year you have seen how the central government came up and they tried to allow 0.5% for this, 0.5% for that. So I think it is, in fact, there are a lot of talk about, the fiscal consolidation meant for states, not for the center. So in that sense, the states are really tied up with the overall, regulatory framework.
Okay. Dr. Renate, there is one question from Ms. Lavanya. She's talking about Morgan Stanley predicted a rate hot capex cycle globally, including India. As the fixed capital formation rate has declined over the years in India, what in your opinion would revive the capex cycle, as greenfield investment may be relatively hard to come up during pandemic?
Since we are just coming out of the pandemic, it may sound a bit odd to say that there is a capex cycle coming up. But I think it's a very strong possibility. I'm quite sure, I'm quite convinced of this for various reasons. One is that the investment stagnation, and Professor Bhanumurthy partly referred to it, had started 4 or 5 years before the pandemic. So we had investment to GDP ratio stagnating at whatever, 28, 29%. As a result of that, capacity utilization rates were going up and up and up. So now we are actually at a situation where we need to embark on big capex across various industries, across various sectors. Secondly, remember the mega trend of India is still very much intact, which is urbanization, which is demographic changes. So all that is also going to be a driver which will push more capex. If you look at per capita consumption in the country of items like steel or cement or various commodities, it's still below world averages. So there's a catch-up phase, which is part. And as our per capita incomes cross from $2,000 to $3,000 or $4,000, we'll see this inflection phenomenon, therefore, which will support the need for capex across many industries. And don't forget, the big theme for the future years is digital and green. The green economy, whether it is, not just solar and wind, but as Minister Gadkari referred to hydrogen. There's going to be lots of new investment coming up in hydrogen-related economy and the whole digital transformation. So I believe we are going to see a sustained capex in the coming years.
Okay. Sunil, one question is from Mr. Srinivasan. He's talking that RBI has ensured that adequate liquidity in the system to keep interest rates low to kickstart credit. On the other hand, due to high inflation, bank deposits give negative inflation adjusted returns. working class, especially senior citizens, find this scenario very difficult to manage. Will the government look into this paradox to provide some kind of comfort, some kind of relief to senior citizens?
Well, I mean, if you look at from the government standpoint, it's possible in the exemption list there is an increase. There's also a talk in general about an increase in the standard deduction limit in this particular budget, so that's possible. And despite bank deposit rates having come down, if you look at the government small saving schemes, PPF, etc., actually the interest rate adjustment on the downside wasn't much. And I suspect that was mainly in order to protect and give better returns to small savers and particularly senior citizens. But I completely agree. I think the reduction in rates we have seen, is also a negative, for households from their savings perspective, because the real return for, savers, pensioners is clearly negative given where inflation is. So as a country, I think, the responsibility is not just government, but also the central bank to ensure that there is a better balance between savers and investors. So I think responsibility also lies in Bombay and not just in Delhi.
Okay,
can I take half a minute on the Capex question? Two important factors in the Capex revival. One is that the twin balance sheet problem is behind us. Both the banking balance sheets are much better and the corporate balance sheets are much less leveraged. So both are in a better position to do Capex. And secondly, of course, not to forget the large infrastructure pipeline that the government has announced. So all these factors in addition to what I said earlier. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add one more small thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the good news is if you look at the advanced estimates, right now the investment rate is 36%. Okay. So we are in a much, I think this is one of the biggest indicator for what's coming in terms of growth next year. So if somebody has anything that, where the investment rates have not picked up, I think right now the advanced estimate says it's 36% of GDP.
That's fantastic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, final question to Professor Bhanumurthy. This is from Mr. Lakshmi Narayanan, and he's asking, at a time when the Indian economy is bouncing back, the government has no way but to support the economy more aggressively on one hand, and has to manage the fiscal deficit on the other hand. What are the pragmatic ways for government to achieve PSU disinvestment target, at least this financial year, so as to finance the fiscal deficit? What do you have to say? Personally, I feel that disinvestment should not be treated as a mean to fill the fiscal deficit. But still, what is your view, sir?
Well, I think, non-tax revenues are a big source for, financing, fiscal deficit. So in that sense, the disinvestment is a much larger proportion. But my own problem is that, given the kind of nature of see, right now, under the disinvestment, there is nothing low-hanging fruit left to really go for a quick disinvestment process. And so it can happen suddenly, the way it happened in the case of Air India, right? Struggled for so many years. One fine day, we have seen that it's been sold. So similarly, it can happen in terms of the LIC as well. But I think one should not really limit this disinvestment targets to April, March kind of a calendar. So it's a continuous process, and I think as and when it happens, that you need to really cover up at least you release the debt. As I said, more than covering the fiscal deficit, I think you release the debt, and in fact, there are many things that they plan, like recapitalization of banks and all those things.
So that's all time we have for this particular issue. So thank you, Dr. Ranade. Thank you very much. Sonal, thank you very much. And Professor Bhanumurthy, thank you very much for joining this discussion.
Thank you, Shishir, and thank you, BusinessLine. Thank you.
Thank you. Devangana, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Shishir and the panelists. That was indeed a wonderful discussion. So we'll now move on to the second panel for the day. It's on reviving private investment and what more can the government do. Over to you, Madhavan, who is the senior associate editor at the Hindu BusinessLine, and he will be moderating the discussion today.
Thanks, Devangana. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We just heard a very exciting discussion on the difficult balancing act that the finance minister has to perform in the forthcoming budget as she targets a rapid pace of economic growth without giving up on fiscal consolidation. A fast pace of economic growth is absolutely essential for India if it has to pull a large section of its society out of poverty. Typically, there are 4 engines of growth. Private consumption, that's the sort of money you and I spend, government spending, private investment, and finally exports. All these 4 engines have to fire if we really have to look at a very high rate of economic growth. Let's look at how each of these engines, how they have performed in the recent times. The consumption has been reviving post the debilitating second wave. And though, like Ajit and others mentioned in the previous panel discussion, that this revival does not seem to be uniform. That could well be because the poor and the middle class or the lower middle class has been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic compared to the upper middle class or the rich. And this probably also explains why demand for high-end cars is far better than two-wheelers. I'm sure the demand will come back and a more uniform demand will come back once the economy emerges out of the pandemic. The government has been consistently spending in a bid to revive growth. This is particularly true with the central government, and the states which have been in the forefront in fighting the pandemic are spending, but they are probably not spending as much as they would like to because of the resource crunch. But overall government spending continues to be reasonably good. That brings us to exports. Exports are booming. If all goes well, India's merchandise exports this year is going to be about $400 billion. After many, many years, we are finally seeing an export growth which is not stagnating, but actually growing at a rapid pace. So if there is one engine of growth that has underperformed, not just now, but it has been underperformed for almost a decade, it is the private investment. This is the sort of money that the private industry puts to expand capacity or create new capacity. It is an important engine of growth considering that it constitutes almost 30% of the GDP. And when India did have its heady 8% GDP growth in 2008-9, it was because in the preceding years, the private investment was substantially high. It was as high as 36% in the year 2007. Today, or if you look at last year, it was just 26.7%. Without a sharp revival in private investment, India cannot accelerate its economic growth. The government is aware of this, and it has been consistently coming out with lots of policies in a bid to revive it. Are they enough? Today we have with us a panel which includes Martin Schwenk, MD and CEO of Mercedes-Benz, Preet Dupar, CFO of IKEA, and Hital Gandhi, Director, CRISIL Research, to discuss this topic on reviving private investment. What more can the government do? For the next 45 minutes, we will be looking at the current state of private investment, why it remains slow, when is it expected to revive, or as some of the panelists pointed out in the previous discussion, has it already started reviving? Advanced estimates do suggest that. And what more should the government do to sort of catalyze it? Following that, we will then open the floor for questions. If you have any questions, do drop it in the Q&A box. We will try and get the experts to answer as many of them as possible. Let me start with Hital. Hital, you have been closely monitoring the private investment over the years. Can you give us a broad picture on how it has performed in the last decade or so, and what has caused it to drop so significantly?
Yeah, thank you so much, Madhavan. If we have to look at the private investment share, it's important to understand what the overall investments in India look like, which clearly get divided into infrastructure-based investments and investments that happen on the industrial side of it. All in all, total combined together, they would be anywhere between around 13 to 15 lakh crores. Roughly 10 lakh crores being on the infrastructure side, and 3.5 lakh crores being on the industrial side of it. Going more deeper into the private investments part of it, infra investments have only 14% share coming up from the private side. As you rightly mentioned, large proportion of the investments over there gets driven by public investments. The smaller proportion of the total investments, which is industrial investments, are the ones where the share of private is substantially high, almost reverse at around 70 to 75%, because you also have government companies over there that do Capex. But of the total industrial investments, you will have a larger share coming from the private investments, which is around 3.5 lakh crores. Within those 3.5 lakh crores, if I look at the companies that are actually investing, you will have close to around 15,000 industrial units that would be investing around that 3.5 lakh crore. But a larger proportion of those investments come from the top 100 to 350 companies that account for 55% of the total investments which are happening. So clearly, private investments in India are A, driven by industrial capex, B, private investments are also driven by the larger corporates, which is the top 300 odd companies. And that's where the entire game lies. I think if we look at the past decade, there is a lot of effort and time which is being spent by the corporates to ensure that their debt equity ratios or key credit matrices get corrected. They have used this pandemic and all the cost savings which have happened during the pandemic to actually pay off their debts. And we very closely monitor these companies and their credit profiles. And what we have seen is that the larger players have seen their absolute total debt coming down during the FY21 financial year period. And of the two components of debt, yes, definitely working capital debt has come down much more sharply, almost by 30-35% for these larger players, because the overall revenue or turnover requirement itself was lower, so they corrected their inventories and working capital. But the long-term debt has also come down by as high as 15%. To add to that, their cash balances have gone up substantially. So combination of this shows clearly that their free cash flows have gone up. Free cash flows to Capex has been at an all-time high, which in turn is making it ripe for an industrial Capex cycle to pick up. And that's why this entire hype, which was also being brought about in the previous panel, that they are already seeing early signs of private Capex setting in FY22 itself. Hope that gives you a perspective.
Yeah, thanks. One of the reasons the private capex, more the industrial capex that you were referring to, was not really taking off was that in the pre-global financial crisis period, there was a lot of cheap money available, and a lot of investments were made, which were subsequently unutilized because of the financial crisis itself and the slowdown and various other challenges that the Indian economy faced. And today, are you seeing a substantial increase in the capacity utilization? I did read a report that you had brought out that seems to be a clear demarcation. The larger companies are seeing a sharp increase in their capacity utilization, but that's not the case with smaller players.
Yes.
Do you see a sharp increase in capacity utilization, and are they happening at a level, at the threshold level, where companies will start investing?
Yeah. So clearly, if I have to look at industrial capex, I will look at the larger industrial sectors. And if you pick up such industrial sectors like cement or steel, and you look at capacity utilization levels, you do find a stark difference emerging. During the pandemic, the larger players have actually gained market shares, consolidated their position, and as a result of which, even with a mild recovery in demand which has happened, you are seeing utilization levels of the larger players shooting up substantially as compared to the mid-sized players. Along with that, with their balance sheets corrected, you are seeing therefore capacity expansion plans, mostly large proportion being brownfield and a few being greenfield also, where they are trying to significantly expand their capacities to capitalize on the combination of better utilization levels and a good balance sheet profile.
Okay.
So that trend is clearly emerging, to be specific, in the large industrial sectors like steel and cement.
So it's now it's all about consumption now. So that once the consumption really picks up, I guess the investments will start happening in a more broad-based manner. To discuss, to understand the entire demand revival, let me go to Preet. Preet, what is the demand like for household products that your company sells? Has it reached the pre-pandemic levels?
So thank you very much, Madhavan. Actually, if you look at household products in particular, I think what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years is the demand increasing, because increasingly life at home has become center stage. I don't know how many of us are today operating from home, but home has been our sanctuary during the course of the pandemic globally as well, and going forward as well. I think as work models continue to emerge, hybrid models are here to stay. Life will remain. The future of work will actually bring us interesting trends, and therefore the demand for products related to home has actually remained pretty steady. Having said that, what I also want to say is that is demand in general impacted, or is consumption in general impacted? The answer, of course, is yes, because there has been an impact on incomes on both the organized and the non-organized, and more so in the non-organized sector. So therefore, discretionary spends as general, both the fact that discretionary spends have gone down, as well as the fact that people are being cautious and either putting aside money towards healthcare and medical expenses, or actually having to spend on healthcare and medical expenses. So in general, discretionary spends have gone down, but the demand for people to repurpose their homes, redo their homes, we've all had to adjust our lifestyles and our homes to accommodate the needs of everybody in the family. And, we've seen that trend. Another trend that we've seen actually is that, the focus on health and well-being has increased. And therefore, what also increases with that is quality consciousness. People are turning to brands they trust, whose quality they trust, companies that they trust, particularly during this time. And also the fact that people are turning to products that are sustainable, or products that actually promote a more sustainable, lifestyle. And when I say that, I'd really like to say that I don't come from, sustainability is not a luxury for the few. Sometimes we think of sustainability as luxury, but I'd just like to remind ourselves as Indians that sustainability is so ingrained into our ways of living that this is not new. So just circular themes have emerged. Sustainable lifestyles have also emerged. That's the other trend that we see.
But as the demand reached the pre-pandemic levels, or are
Yes.
you seeing sort of a pent-up demand which may not be sustainable? What is your feel on that?
I think of course, we've seen a pent-up demand as well, no doubt about that. But at least when it comes to the sector which is, related to home and home products, the demand has been pretty steady and is back to pre-pandemic levels as well. Or in fact has been more. Yeah.
Great. Martin, your industry is in a very peculiar situation. It is unable to meet demand because of supply side disruption, especially with respect to semiconductor chips. When do you see that getting resolved? And before that, I would like to also you to talk about demand per se for automobiles.
Yeah, thanks, Madan. I would say in the auto sector, I'm most competent to talk about the premium and luxury segment. And I can clearly say that we have seen in that segment, and specifically with Mercedes-Benz, a very strong rebound after the second wave in the pandemic. We have seen globally very strong demand for our products, and here in India that happened in a very similar way. I attribute that to a large extent to the confidence that businesses have had in that period. I mean, whilst the first wave was very insecure, it was not clear how things continue. It took a little longer to recover. In the second wave, businesses had a more clear approach and knew better what to expect. And if you look at the current situation, I would extend that to that. Whilst the numbers are going very steeply up, we see more confidence to manage the current wave. And with that, we have seen a very strong recovery, which has pushed us into a situation that we don't have enough components, and specifically on semiconductors, there's issues. But the entire supply chains, you are aware of that when it comes to logistics processes being between suppliers, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers globally is very much under stress. And that has caused a situation in which we are not able to actually fulfill that demand. And again, this is not an India-only situation. We are part of the global picture here. If you ask me now how this is unwinding, I think it will take some time. On the semiconductors, the prognosis is different. Yeah, there is different approaches, but I'm sure it will keep us busy at least for the next 6 months. And if we talk about the supply chain stress and the instabilities that are there, I would also not be able to predict that it is faster than in the next by the second half of this year. You know, we have these waves of COVID, which always gives another fuel to the problem, and it kind of hovers around the world and hits in different areas at different point in time. With that, I think it's also very hard to predict how it will continue. But currently, we have, I think, stabilized the situation, and that we have learned to live with the situation, and we adjusting to that as much as possible. But so it's stable in that sense, and it's slightly improving here and there. But to really say now everything, all traffic lights are back on green, I think we are far away from that. Yeah, sorry, your second question was again, sorry, Madhvan?
No, you did answer that. I was asking you about the disruption. How long will it take?
Okay.
Okay. The auto sector, Martin, has been investing in the recent years, or rather it was forced to invest because of a lot of changes, basically regulatory changes. The auto sector moved to BS6, and there were new safety requirements, enhanced safety requirements that the auto sector had to deal with, like the seat belts and so on, a crash test, so on and so forth. And then now there is the shift to cleaner fuel, whether it is electric, flex fuel, as the minister talked about, and so on. Now, what sort of investments do you think the next shift to cleaner fuel will entail for the industry?
Yeah, I mean, we can clearly say that the global trend, and I heard that already from Preet, in terms of sustainability and sustainable approach, that goes across all industries. We talk here obviously all kinds of say cleanliness, that is from CO2 footprint to waste management, to all, I mean, energy management, and so forth. So it goes across, and for us also, we have a clear view that sustainability is a core driver of future business. And with that, it is very natural to assume that we need to move into the next generation of energy use. And for cars, that is clear on a global level that electrification will come and electric vehicles will be the future in that field. And with that, I think all initiatives in that direction entail massive investments in several areas. I mean, for us as a global brand, a lot of the investment into the technology happens in the first place in the R&D world, which happens to some extent here in Bangalore with our R&D teams, but it's globally driven also from our Stuttgart function. So we're talking billions here. There is investment into new battery facilities and then also production capabilities. So it is very high numbers, billions that are actually coming and are invested right now. The product development has made huge progress, whilst electrification in the past years were still held back a little bit by several aspects. Maybe government policies were not conducive, maybe consumer demand was not there, or product availability was not there. I think all of these parameters have shifted to some extent, in which we see a government globally and also in India putting a stronger emphasis on electric products. And at the same time, consumer awareness has massively increased. I mean, I'm here in India for a little bit over 3 years. And when I asked 3 years ago, customers, journalists, dealers, investors, would you want an electric car? What do you think about electric cars? The answer was basically don't bother. 3 years later, the interest has completely changed. So we see a strong interest from the public, from the consumer base. And at the same time, the global development processes on vehicles has also delivered now to a large extent. Our brand, other brands have now multiple electric vehicles available, which will then also be able to meet the consumer demand. So the change is on its way. It will still take some time, also here in India, I'm sure, till we have broader adoption, but the change is going on.
Great. The government of India has come out with the productively linked incentive schemes, which involves an outlay of almost 2 lakh crores across 13 sectors. These are clearly time-bound projects, and ideally they should catalyze private investment. Hital, do you think that is already happening? Are you seeing signs of PLIs sort of reviving the private investments in the country?
Yeah, I think there have been incentives that were being announced, and now we are seeing a round where selection of companies under those incentives is happening. So there was an incentive announcement and scheme announcement process, then a process where there was bidding, and of the 13 sectors, almost 8 to 10 of them, we are also actually seeing now companies who have bid out. Selections taking place, some rehaul also, which is being done in the scheme during the entire process, and we do believe, yes, 2.2 to 2.5 lakh crore worth of investments that should come up. I already spoke to you about investments or Capex, which is being done by top 15,000 industrial firms, which is expected around 3.5 lakh crores. So as compared to that, the number is huge. It can almost drive entire Capex for 1 full year, but the scheme is spread across 3 years. Given that there were certain delays in terms of selection of companies, we believe only 9 to 10% of the total Capex in FY22 will be driven by PLI. And that number will shoot up to almost 20 to 25% over the next 2 years, which is FY23 and 24. So we believe that if it wouldn't have been for PLI, the industrial Capex number wouldn't have gone to the earlier pre-pandemic levels. So clearly the PLI scheme linked Capex is enabling us to drive that recovery curve from an investment point of view. And we also believe that there are sectors where we did not have any substantial presence from an ecosystem point of view. where there is going to be fresh investments which are going to be happening. I think the likes of ACC batteries or semiconductors, which is out of PLI, but there is an incremental investment coming up over there. And even sectors where like electronics or mobile handsets, where earlier investments were not happening, you are going to see a huge drive, and that is going to be a trigger for the recovery of the investment cycle. Further, we have gone a little deep dive, and because even Martin as well as Preet were speaking about sustainability, and I can clearly draw the link of the PLI linked capex. If you see, almost 40% of the
Hidal, I think we lost you. Okay, looks like we lost Hidal. Okay, let her come back, and we will continue the discussion on the point that she was talking about. In the meantime, I thought I will go into the next part of the discussion. Hital, are you back?
Yes, I'm back.
Yeah, please go ahead. You were talking about the sustainability and the sort of investment.
Yes. So drawing parallel to what Preet and Martin were saying, what we have observed is that sustainability linked capex has already started getting triggered. So for example, if you do a deep dive analysis of PLI capex itself, what you will find is that almost 40% of the PLI capex is linked to sustainability linked capex. So you are not only driving incremental newer areas of capex, but you are also driving or taking your first steps towards green capex along with PLI.
Oh, great. Okay. I would like to ask now each one of you on, what more the government should do. Before that, I would like to just list what the government has already done in its attempt to revive capex. One is that it has cut the corporate tax rate rather sharply. It is just 15% for a new manufacturing company today. And it has also announced PLI schemes with a very large outlay. And it is also spending heavily on capex, building infrastructure and other things. And it is pushing the states to do so. And RBI's monetary policy continues to be accommodative, which at the least means that the interest rates are going to remain benign. And what more do you think the government should do to accelerate private investments? Let me start with Preet.
Thank you, Madhavan, for also listing out what has already been done. So you're very right to say that there is, the government is on the track, I think, in terms of identification of sectors and, to focus on PLI schemes. And I'll actually focus on, talk a bit about 3 sectors. Okay. And then again, in each of these, the first step by the government has already been taken. It's about how fast do we progress and how do we progress, right? So I'll talk about retail as a sector, because that also is a fairly capital intensive, sector, brings in large amounts of investments. And one of the challenges that we see is that there isn't a national retail policy, and also that is retail identified as an industry sector? Does it have the same, let's say, not just financial benefits, but let's say, one nodal industry to go to for, to reduce its compliance burden? Do we look at online, offline retail together, as one sector, or do we actually think of e-commerce separately and, retail separately, which doesn't really work? So again, there's a draft national retail policy. But the recognition of retail as an industry sector, the recognition that retail brings capital investments and therefore, job creation, and maybe think about, the large mega projects in retail linked to it, real estate, shopping centers, ease off some norms for those investments to come in, because I can also share with you, it's equally challenging sometimes to bring money into the country. right? If you're actually trying to rely on intra-group funding. So there's definitely work to be done there. Then the second one, if I pick up, home furnishing again, the government has already identified furniture as a focus, as a sector to focus on. Now, when supply chain diversification is happening across the globe, we clearly see that India has this fantastic opportunity to become a manufacturing hub, for the rest of the world. But it's a roadmap to get there. It's not going to happen in a short term. So, then I think what I would ask the government actually is to create that trust and collaboration with the industry, to come together to identify what needs to be done in the short term, what needs to be done in the medium term, what can be done in the long term, and work towards that. And it won't happen in the budget this year, but towards the short term, if we want to keep the sector growing, then we have to look at reducing customs duty rate, looking at even GST rates for home products, so that good quality products remain affordable to the consumer, while at the same time we create a roadmap by reducing customs duties on raw materials, by looking at PLI schemes. So furniture is not there yet in the PLI schemes, but PLI schemes for furniture. The government is talking about furniture parks, but in those furniture parks, or if we create large industrial sectors like that, say for furniture, then can we also support the manufacturing companies who want to come in with plug and play facilities, so that the companies actually spend their time and effort on manufacturing rather than spending their time and effort on building up the entire ecosystem. So I think that's what can be done in in the furniture sector as a whole. Also look at tax benefits. I mean, we've already said 15% corporate tax for new manufacturing units, but also look at other tax benefits as well. And then if we want to also increase our cost and quality competitiveness, also to remain that if we want our products to be competitive in the global market, right? Because when you manufacture for India, but you also manufacture for, across the globe, and we spoke about exports growing, then we also have to adopt global quality standards, right? We have to move towards standardization rather than creating our own quality standards. I think those are things that we can do. The third thing that the government can do, and again, steps have already been taken, is get into trade agreements where trade agreements do not exist, so that you have trade facilitation there are conversations I know that are on with UK, there are conversations that are on with EU, and I think those will also go a long way in promoting investment into the country, from overseas as well as promoting, our products overseas. And sorry, I'm going to mention the fourth one, which is about sustainability, but solar and wind for sure. But I think there is a need to also look at urban freight and electric vehicles, and again, for the government and the industry to come together on that, because so far all the schemes and all the focus has been towards the passenger vehicles or the smaller vehicles. But if you have to look at larger urban freight, which is where how goods move across the country, then also there's a need for the industry and the government to come together. Other than that, very, very simply, just predictability of policy, regulatory policy and tax regime would go a long way in building the confidence of the community as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Martin, I'm sure you will agree with the last point that Preet mentioned, because automotive industry has been at the receiving end of rapid policy changes. So what are your thoughts on steps that the government can take to further catalyze investment?
I mean, let me say, I'm positively surprised how much we have in common with the furniture industry, Preet, because a lot of the topics you mentioned, I would have a very similar assessment on the situation. I mean, let me say on the first step, the government has clearly taken an initiative to push forward manufacturing also with the PLI schemes. The ideas are there and some of it comes into implementation. That is for me the right direction, and I think we need more of that. We need more of say a growth strategy in the mid and long term, and schemes they should not run for 2 or 3 years. We need longer periods for sustained investment into, say, new factories, new products. So we need a holistic approach in that growth approach. And then for me, then obviously we have retail, but for me as a manufacturer, also very important, really a lot of, say, focus into the manufacturing itself, and then in auto would help. Because we heard Mr. Gadkari, there is a couple of issues I can take with that. Of course, we need agriculture in the world, in India, in order not only to feed people, but also to support maybe the transition in energy consumption and so forth. But on the other hand, a strong promoter for employment, for technology transfer as well is manufacturing. And there, obviously, the auto industry also as an industry which brings in a lot of new technologies, high-end technologies, which is then also not only creating employment, but also highly value-adding employment. I think we could see a little stronger on this element of the industry itself, which I could really still see some improvement. Of course, in our segment, it's even more difficult. We will, for example, not be able to participate in PLI schemes just based on the fact that we have already invested substantially. 2,600 crore are already invested. But because of growth of the passenger car market in India is not as it was expected many years ago, we're not able to have a suitable and big enough local and domestic footprint. So in terms of sales, domestically sales, you need strong domestic sales in the auto industry also to become actually a hub for exportation. And there, I think there could still be more done in terms of developing the manufacturing, the auto industry, and specifically also in our segment to have a stronger local footprint. We need more domestic demand, and there's a couple of hurdles. I don't want to claim always we need lower duties and taxes, but for sure that is an element which slows the effects. And then Preet was talking about trade agreements. Of course, this is one of the elements which is essential, yeah, because for domestic production, but also for import-export relations, you need to have that element focused in a very strong way. And for us, as mostly a European-based country, of course, trade agreements with the EU are of higher essence that would allow us, for example, to bring in at cheaper import duty rates cars, and we at the same time allow to have a much stronger localized production and export opportunities. Elements at this stage we cannot really participate to the level I'm sure India could aim for. With that, I believe also in short term there is not so much I would wish or hope for, because I also understand the limitations that are given to the government, but to give us mid and long-term indication on how we can grow and have consistent policies approach. I would want to go for 1 minute back to what Mr. Gadkari said. He gives me a bouquet of options for drivetrains, from hydrogen to flex fuel to electrification. We will have to narrow down to some extent, and for us we have decided it will be electric vehicles, purely battery-driven electric vehicles. And for that, I think the auto industry also needs clear signals. What is really the expectation? What is the strategy going forward? And also then, if it is electric, also help in creating framework for infrastructure so that we have the roads. That's great, but we need also then the charging points. We need investment into the EV infrastructure for supporting that growth. So that's a little bit my view. I think a lot of common interest with many industry partners here, even the furniture industry.
Great. Heathal, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think both Preet and Martin have, given very good thoughts, especially on the export trade policy side. But Madhavan, I'll go back to what you started with, that, there are 4 pillars on which the entire revival is shaped. And you said, exports, domestic consumption, industrial capex, and the overall ecosystem development, right? Now, on the export side of it, while we are reaching peak export levels, and the PLI scheme is focusing on substituting imports as well as promoting exports, the time is right for India to take super advantage of the global mindset of going for a China plus one policy. And that is where the trade agreements that both Martin and Preet spoke about will be very, very crucial. Where if we want to really be the world's trade partner, we will have to start chalking out those trade-off plans in reducing import duties on certain parts and ensuring that we are creating huge export opportunities for us in the China plus one strategy. So I think that can play a very crucial role. PLI helps to a certain extent in a lot of sectors, but how do we create a structural level playing field, for example, in sectors like textiles, where while we may be having a PLI scheme focusing on technical textiles or more on the MMF side, promoting more blending, and while we are talking about textile parks, even the combination of these two might not make us competitive in the global landscape. So, how do we then also use the trade agreements to have a structural competitiveness in place? I think that is going to be important from an exports point of view. From a consumption point of view, and Martin spoke about it, that the domestic market needs to have a healthy growth rate. And there are clear trends which have emerged today or in the recovery year, if I may say so, in India. In FY22, if you look at utility vehicles growth rate in the overall cars and utility vehicle space, you are seeing a huge growth. Urban consumers are going from upper end small cars or mid-sized cars to utility vehicles. So we are seeing that, the income levels, entire IT boom that we are seeing, all of that has transpired into good income levels, strong confidence in the urban consumers, and they are looking at, going towards the more upper end of the vehicles. If you also look at the supply constraints and therefore, kind of waiting periods for utility vehicles, you are seeing waiting periods of 1.5 years. Speaks volumes about the kind of backlog that is there that needs to be serviced. But on the other side, let's look at the small car segment. Waiting periods because of supply chain constraints on an average are 2 to 3 months. And even if I add those 1.5, 2 months worth of volumes, your small car segment at max would have ended flat instead of, a drop that it might see at the end of FY22. Two-wheelers already is showing decline in volumes. If you look at FMCG volumes, pickup has been sub 5% at an overall volume level. So how do you bring about that recovery such that all parts of the pyramid are growing and the bottom of the pyramid needs to start driving that recovery curve? So from the short-term point of view, how you can bring about revival in domestic consumption, more so from the bottom of the pyramid point of view, is going to be very, very crucial for the government to look at. And that can trigger a lot of things in terms of better utilization levels for erstwhile capacities. And therefore, you don't have Capex only from PLI, but you also start having Capex from the otherwise, erstwhile assets. And auto component players can also start investing in fresh capacities. The third and the most important leg is, if we want to keep this Capex cycle ongoing, they will have to start investing in creating the ecosystem for triggering green capital expenditure. So, SOPs for setting up infrastructure that Preet was speaking about, or even Martin is speaking about, and clarity in terms of the electric vehicle policy. Are we going to support it over the long term with subsidies, or we are not going to provide demand subsidies beyond FAME 2? What is the strategy that the government has in mind? Are we going to provide more or rely more on investment or Capex incentives, or we are going to do a combination of demand incentives and Capex incentives? I think that clarity will really help to trigger, green Capex on the transportation, power, oil and gas side. And that can then result into a sustained recovery in the overall investment cycle. So I guess, the bits and pieces on exports, bottom of the pyramid consumption cycle, and clarity on the green Capex cycle can really have a sustained recovery from an investment point of view. I hope that sums it up well.
Okay, we do have some very interesting questions. So we will move to the audience questions. There's one question to Martin. How does one get a balance between India's Make in India mission and the demand from foreign automakers, including Tesla, to cut import duties?
I think a lot of the duty structures which we have in place are from times where the auto industry in India maybe was not competitive in the global scheme. I think what we need to achieve is competitiveness in our products in India. And that is the core number one. If you assume that you have competitive products, they will not only be domestically, but they will be globally competitive. And with that assumption, then you will be able to have export and import balance. If you work with the assumption that India is not capable in producing world-class products, you need some level of hurdle for entry of, I would then say, superior products. I don't think we have that mindset anymore. We have seen the auto industry evolving massively. So I think in terms of productivity, competitiveness of product, there is a huge advantage. And as always, competition helps to even further increase that. So the more competition comes into the Indian market, the more you will have competing force in other markets. And I think that's the thought we have to have as people who adhere to economy. So I'm clear of the opinion we need to compete in every market. And that is true here in India, and it's true globally. And that is how the balances work. We have a lot of advantages here in India, which we can harvest. That is intellectual resource, that is labor to some extent, also cheaper in some elements. We need to use that accordingly. And if that is then creating a competitive advantage that translates into good products, then we should not fear. Then we should use the lower thresholds of import duties. At the same time, ideally, substantially lower than what was discussed with in the press now for a couple of weeks. We talk substantially lower levels if we want to go to WTO levels or so. We're not talking 30, 40, 50. We talk maybe 2, 5, 10%. And that is the levels we should actually be aiming at, with an assumption that we want to be a powerhouse in the global industry, and we should define paths how to get there. That's my personal view on this specific question.
Madhavan, can I just step in here as well? And Martin, this is also, similar to that. Exactly the same thing applies to furniture, as well. And I, from the time that we've actually, started our operations in India, we've seen a protectionist policy come in, towards furniture, with constant increase in customs duty rates. And this is where, again, we kind of ask for, not to get tempted to, do short-term protectionist measures, because we believe that these kind of protectionist measures would actually hurt the industry in the long term, right? Because when you have the preconditions, when you come to a level where the furniture industry roadmap picks up, the objective should be that the Indian products are competitive, in the global world. And we have to have that belief in ourselves, in our own industry, to let that competition, actually happen. That, and I think we underestimate the potential of India by putting in protectionist measures. So I would definitely say, one of the things that we would request the government to look at is not to step into very tempting short-term protectionist measures. Our industry can withstand competition and can stand up to global competitive levels.
Okay. There's another interesting question, though not directly linked to Capex. There's one question from Mr. Srinivasan Velamur. Heathal, I think you should take this. If, as one of the panel members has said, the corporates are into repaying debts before starting their investment, why is there a gloomy forecast on the part of RBI recently, wherein they have predicted commercial banks' NPAs to go up by 9.5% in September 2022 from 6.9%? Doesn't it show that there is stress still prevailing in the system?
Yes, so I think the trends are different in corporate India as well. when just as we saw in the consumption cycle, where you saw that the urban consumers have actually started showing much better recovery curves as compared to the rural consumers, or if I may say so, bottom of the pyramid consumers. And a similar trend is also seen in corporate India performance. If you look at the entire period and quarterly results that were getting published by listed players during the pandemic and post the pandemic, it were the mid-size and the smaller players that were hit much more sharply as compared to the larger guys during the pandemic. Even margin sustenance of larger players was good. Smaller players showed a sharp drop in margins. So their ability to lower cost was limited. Their ability to bargain with their vendors was limited. And that hit has been seen. Plus, I already mentioned that the larger players actually gained market share. And the reverse of that happened to the mid-size and the smaller players, where they have lost market share during the pandemic. So you were not able to reduce your cost, you have lost market share, and that clearly has resulted into they going for some kind of a pain that you would see more in the MSME sector than in the non-MSME sector. And the second point is that even on the retail loan side of it, we have seen huge amount of turmoil. And given retail loan portfolios of banks were growing very sharply, the entire stagnation in growth that has happened has also resulted into numerically your GNPA is actually looking much higher than what they were in the past. So clearly, yes, there is some increase in GNPA that we have seen. I would say is linked more with the mid-size and the smaller players from a corporate India standpoint, and also on the retail, where the pain has been much more, as people have at the bottom of the pyramid have lost their jobs. So that entire retail portfolio, whether it is personal loans or whether it is two-wheeler loans, you will see some kind of a pain. Or commercial taxi owners, you will see some kind of a pressure coming up on the GNPA side on those asset classes. So yes, you will see that, but as the growth returns, there will be a natural correction in this. And plus, you will also see cash flow stabilizing, bringing about some sort of a correction over there. But we have to be very clear that the beginning of the Capex cycle is going to be driven by larger players. The mid-size and the smaller players are only going to catch up when the consumption curves the domestic consumption curve shows a very sharp recovery, and their erstwhile assets show very good utilization levels. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah. There's another. I'll take one final question, and this is for both Preet and Martin. Input costs are rising due to global inflation, leading to price rise at product levels. How is this being tackled at the company level, and what can the government do to address this global problem? Martin?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a difficult question, also difficult to address. I mean, input costs have been going up, and there we have, on the one hand, a global phenomenon of increase in inflation. Logistics costs have gone up substantially, and that is international logistics, domestic logistics. So, of course, anything in terms of logistics can help. On the other hand, material prices, raw material prices, and to some extent also exchange rate related equations, specifically for us, for example, who have obviously a lot of importation from Europe. We had seen a constant, say, devaluation over some time. That has luckily stopped. So I think that's a bigger question in terms of economic steering. It's not easy to steer. We have to make sure that to some extent we gain additional efficiencies, and to some extent, unfortunately, we'll have to put that through and increase pricing accordingly. That is the unfortunate truth. I don't think any company is able to absorb relatively drastic cost increases, which we have across many of the input cost factors, be it material, be it labor now also will get again, and of course then anything around that, energy, exchange rate driven, and so forth.
I think again, similar answer. It does put the whole dilemma of affordability into questions, as you know, with IKEA. Affordability is one of our pillars. Our objective is, that anybody should be able to actually walk into our stores or shop online, and absolutely from, any economic, segment. And that's what we've been trying to achieve. So obviously we've also looked at cost rationalization, to see what is it that we can do, to protect the consumers, and so that our products still remain affordable. And on the government side, again, I would refer to what Mr. Ranade spoke about, which is the whole indirect tax burden. So I think definitely, and I know budget is not the place for GST rates, but to definitely look at what is essential to life, and therefore look at rationalization or lowering of GST rates, because that has an impact on the price that the consumer has to pay. That's something I would look at. Logistics cost, I think, will take time for for it to ease out. And our effort as an organization is to ensure that we remain affordable in every segment of of the furniture market, and remain affordable compared to our competitors.
Great. Thank you very much. It's been an interesting discussion. Thank you, Martin, Preet, Heetal. We do have overshot our time. So let me wind up now, and let's hope that the early signs of the Capex revival sustains, and maybe next year we can look at accelerating it further. Thank you very much. And over to you, Devangana.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madhavan. Well, that brings us to the end of the program. We take this opportunity once again to thank our speakers, event sponsors, BOB Financial, the credit card arm of Bank of Baroda, and Hitachi India. And of course, the very active and amazing audience that we had today. Thank you all, and have a wonderful day ahead.